Shenzhen's early morning humidity clung to the skin like a second layer of clothing. Sophia Joseph adjusted the fraying strap of her tote bag and stepped onto the crowded metro, eyes scanning faces without really seeing them. Her curly hair, hidden under a plain scarf, stuck to her neck. Sweat and neon buzzed in equal measure. She hated this place, not because it was loud or foreign, but because she wasn't supposed to be here. 3 years ago, she had stood on the verge of marriage to a man the world respected, only to watch her name get scorched in a scandal she didn't cause. She had disappeared under another name. A false passport, forged credentials, and too many nights counting coins in a freezing flat had become her reality. Now she cleaned offices at night and worked as a translator by day, illegally, quietly, constantly looking over her shoulder. And then he walked in. It was a Thursday. Rain misted the shop windows. She was translating a financial agreement for a wealthy client in a back room of a tea house turned co-working space when a voice asked in crisp Mandarin, "Excuse me, are you Sophia?" She froze. Her hand trembled slightly on the paper. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud since she arrived in China. "I think you have me mistaken," she said without turning. "No, I'm quite certain it's you." She turned then and found herself staring into the eyes of a man who didn't belong in this world of peeling paint and buzzing fluorescent lights. Tall, sleek, wearing a charcoal designer coat. But it was his calmness that unsettled her. The way he looked at her like he already knew everything. "I don't know who you are," she said sharply, "but I'm working. Please leave." "My name is Runu Zhao. I'd like to make you a proposal." They sat across from each other later that evening in a near-empty noodle bar with flickering red lanterns and soft jazz leaking from a radio behind the counter. Sophia kept her arms folded tightly, like she was holding herself together. "I don't care who you are. This whole thing reeks." "It should," he replied smoothly. "What I'm proposing isn't ordinary." He slid a folder across the table. Inside, a visa application, financial statements, legal documentation, all under her assumed name. She didn't touch it, just stared at him. "A marriage," he said. "On paper only. 1 year. You get a clean identity, debt forgiveness, and access to my family's accounts in case of emergency. And you? Stability," he said. "An obedient wife for appearances only. My family is watching me. There are assets I need control over. Being married strengthens my legal footing." Sophia scoffed. "And you couldn't find anyone better for that role?" "I could," he said, calm, "but no one would believe I'd choose you." She blinked, her jaw clenched. "Excuse me?" He didn't flinch. "You're a risk, a foreigner. Your face alone guarantees questions. No one would suspect it's strategic. That's why it works." Her pride nearly sent her out the door, but her phone buzzed. A message from her landlord. Immigration came again. "I warned you. I can't lie for you anymore." Her hand trembled as she set the phone down. "You don't know anything about me," she said tightly. "Not yet," he replied, voice softer now. "But I know what it feels like to run out of places." She looked away. Her breath hitched once, not a sob, just exhaustion finally catching up. "You're not offering safety," she said. "You're offering a new kind of cage." "Maybe," he said, "but it's a cage with a key. You keep the key." A long silence. She looked down at the folder again, the kind of documents people died trying to fake. She should have walked away. Instead, she whispered, "How soon?" 3 days. She stared at him, then at the flickering lantern above, then down at her own hands, tired, trembling, still stained faintly with ink from translation work she knew could vanish any day. And for the first time since arriving in China, she said something she never thought she would. "Fine, I'll marry you." Not because she trusted him. not because she wanted to, but because she was done being hunted with no name to protect her. The room was silent, but her thoughts were loud. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, the contract folder unopened on the floor, its edges catching the light from the street lamp outside. Her coat still hung on the chair, half damp from the rain, and her duffel bag sat slumped in the corner like it knew she wasn't going anywhere tonight. She stared at her reflection in the dusty mirror above the sink. "I didn't say yes," she whispered. Not to him, not to what it meant, not really. "I said fine," a word born of exhaustion, of being tired of running, of walking through life like a question no one wanted to answer. She rubbed her hands over her face and laughed, quiet, bitter. "What are you doing, Sophia?" But the silence didn't answer. Instead, her memory answered. The look in that landlord's message, final. The friend who stopped replying after the second visit from the authorities. This wasn't safety. This was a gamble. But what choice did she have left? She had survived things that didn't leave bruises, but left cracks that felt permanent. And tonight, this offer, as dangerous and humiliating as it was, felt like not freedom, but a pause, a second to breathe. Just 1 year, she told herself. 1 year to get a clean slate. 1 year to build a new name. 1 year to make sure they never find her again. "This isn't surrender," she whispered into the dark. "It's strategy." And she repeated it until the lie felt almost true. Runchu's room. Later, that night. The apartment was quiet, as always. Too quiet. The city lights of Shenzhen spilled across the windows, casting geometric shapes on the floor. Clean, sharp, calculated. Just like him. Just like he was trained to be. He poured a glass of water, but didn't drink it. Just held it. Let the condensation slide down his fingers like sweat that hadn't yet formed. She said yes, well, fine. Not exactly eager. Not exactly broken. Just cornered. Runchu leaned against the counter, eyes unfocused, and let the stillness wrap around him like a question he didn't want to answer. She didn't ask about money or status or guarantees. She just looked at him like he was another locked door. And for the briefest second, he wondered how many locked doors she had kicked down in her life. Then came the voice. Quiet, cold, embedded in the back of his mind. Make her trust you. Find out the truth. Then disappear. That was the plan. Marry her, watch her, report. If she had the evidence, extract it. If she was clean, discard her. Efficient, clean, without attachment. He told himself it was mercy, that this, offering her a new name, a bed, silence, was kinder than a cell in a Nigerian prison or a cold cage in an immigration center. He had read her file a dozen times, but sitting across from her, she didn't feel like a file. Sophia Joseph wasn't what the intel said. She wasn't soft, she wasn't angry, she was aware, and that made her dangerous. You won't fail, they told him. You're a Zhao. Runchu looked down at the untouched glass in his hand and muttered to no one. Then why does this already feel like failure? He set the glass down, his reflection warped in the window. He wasn't afraid of being caught, or exposed, or even killed. He was afraid of something far more dangerous, that he was already beginning to believe her. That somewhere between strategy and silence, this woman, this liability, had started to feel like something else. The wedding was conducted 3 days later in a private room in a family-owned registry office. There were no guests, no flowers, just paperwork, stamps, and a government official who didn't ask questions as long as the bribe was generous. Sophia wore a gray blouse for the ceremony. He slid the ring on her finger without touching her skin. She didn't flinch. They didn't speak. "Congratulations," the official muttered. Sophia let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It felt like signing a treaty with an empire she didn't understand. The house was in an upscale district. Glass walls, high security, minimalist everything. Too clean, too quiet. Runu led her through the tour like a hotel manager. "This is the guest room. You can use the office if needed. My assistant will handle your paperwork." "Is this how you treat all your wives?" "I've only had one," he said, deadpan. "You." She rolled her eyes and went to unpack, though she had little more than a duffel bag and a second-hand coat. Nights were tense. Runu spent most evenings out or locked in his study. Sophia wandered the house like a ghost, sometimes pausing to study the strange blend of art and military precision that filled the place. She noticed things: the file cabinet that was always locked, the surveillance monitors, the way he answered certain calls with Mandarin, too formal for everyday conversation. He noticed things too: the way she flinched at loud knocks, how she never spoke about her past, how she always memorized the exits of a room. They were both playing roles. A few months ago, inside Intelligence HQ, Beijing. "Your mission is not to fall in love, Zhao." "Understood." "She's not innocent. That woman ran from an international arrest warrant. She may know something about the funds flowing through her ex-fiancé's political group. And if she doesn't, then she's just a liability. Make her trust you. Find out the truth, then disappear. And if I fail, you won't. You're a Zhao." Back in Shenzhen, Sophia stood on the balcony that night, the city buzzing below like static. She whispered to herself, "You made your choice. Just survive it." Inside, Runu watched her through the glass. He whispered to no one, "You have no idea what you've just walked into." Sophia stood still before the mirror, trying not to fidget as the zipper glided up her back. The gown was midnight blue, sleeveless, hugging the curves she usually tried to hide beneath oversized coats. Her bare shoulders gleamed under soft lighting. It was too much. "It's dramatic," she said. "It's appropriate," Runu replied from the doorway. "You're coming as my wife. The dress matches my tie." Sophia turned to face him. His eyes were already on her, cool, calculating, but with the faintest flicker of something else. "Just remember," she said, voice low, "I may be the hired wife, but I don't play pet." "Good," he said, offering his arm. "I don't keep pets. I keep my word." The first event was at a luxury hotel overlooking Shenzhen Bay, a gala hosted by a pharmaceutical conglomerate. Guests floated like smoke between conversations, perfumed and predatory. Crystal lights sparkled above like artificial constellations. Sophia stayed close to Runu's side at first, navigating whispers in Mandarin and curious stares from the upper crust of Chinese society. Is she American? No. Nigerian, maybe? Where did he find her? She understood more than they thought. Words didn't have to be fully translated to be recognized as venom. But Sophia had survived worse than whispers. She straightened her spine, smiled like a queen, and held her wine glass with the elegance of someone born to the table. Runu didn't intervene. Later that night in the car, he glanced at her profile as she stared out the window. "You carried yourself well." "You mean I didn't embarrass you?" "I mean," he corrected, "you didn't flinch. That's rarer than it looks." She let the silence stretch. "You didn't correct them," she said finally. "Would it have made a difference?" She turned to him, eyes calm but sharp. "To me, it would have." Days passed. The routine stabilized. Public appearances, silent dinners, guarded glances. One morning, Sophia wandered into his study. Runu wasn't home. She wasn't snooping. Not exactly. She had just grown curious. The room was lined with dark walnut bookshelves, the air warm with the faint scent of old paper and sandalwood. Titles in Mandarin, English, and classical Chinese lined the walls. First editions, rare collections, treatises on war, poetry, law. One book caught her eye, a weathered anthology of Tang Dynasty poetry. She opened it, eyes tracing the faded ink. There is no dust in the world to settle the heart, but your eyes made me forget the wind. Du fu. She murmured it aloud in perfect Mandarin. That was my mother's favorite poem, he said. She turned. Runu stood in the doorway, jacket still on, as if he'd just walked in but hadn't made a sound. You read classical Chinese? He asked, stepping inside. My father collected rare manuscripts. He thought poetry was a moral obligation. Runu crossed the room slowly. They told me you were clever, but they didn't say you were cultivated. And who exactly are they, Mr. Zhao? He paused, too long, then smiled, just enough to dodge the question. Remind me never to underestimate you again. Good. I'd hate for you to be disappointed. They stood inches apart. She closed the book with care and placed it back on the shelf. The rain came down in soft sheets that evening, turning the city into a watercolor of light and sound. Sophia tossed in bed, sweat on her neck despite the cool air. Her breath hitched, caught in a dream she couldn't escape. Sign it, her ex's voice hissed in her memory. If you want your brother alive, you'll confess. Take the fall. Her hands trembled. The room shrank. Panic surged. She jolted awake, choking on her own breath. She didn't hear Runu approach, but he must have heard her from down the hall. He stopped at the doorway, the light behind him casting a shadow across the bed. Are you all right? She was curled beneath the blanket, her face pale and strained. Don't pretend to care, she muttered hoarsely. He didn't argue. Instead, he disappeared into the kitchen. When he returned, he placed a mug beside her, ginger and chrysanthemum tea, still steaming. I care about what jeopardizes my household, he said flatly, nightmares included. She eyed the tea. Thank you, she said eventually. He nodded once, turned to go, but paused at the door. It helps to talk about it. Does it? She asks. No, he admitted, but it's better than bleeding alone. And then he left. That night, Sophia stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, holding the still warm mug to her chest like an anchor. The charity gala was hosted by the Zhao Foundation, Runu's family's oldest political tool. Sophia wore a sleek red gown this time, hair coiled into a regal updo. She had styled herself. No assistants, no stylist, no softening the fact that she was black, foreign, and unashamed. They entered the ballroom on his arm. People noticed. Eyebrows rose. One woman even laughed behind a gloved hand. She doesn't match him. She's loud, unrefined. Runu turned smoothly. That woman, he said, loud enough to hush the nearby table, speaks 5 languages, including yours, and she reads more books in a year than most of you have in your entire lives. Silence fell like a knife. If you're looking for class, he added, offering Sophia his drink, try dignity. The rest of the night, no one dared speak her name again. In the car ride home, neither of them spoke at first. The city lights danced on the tinted windows. Sophia rested her head against the glass, eyelids growing heavy. You didn't have to do that, she murmured. Do what? Defend me. I didn't, he said. I stated facts. She smiled faintly. I don't trust you. That's wise, he replied. I don't trust myself either. There was a long pause. She shifted slightly. The car hit a bump, and instinctively, Runchu reached out to steady her. She didn't pull away. A beat. Then, gently, she rested her head on his shoulder. It was small, unspoken, temporary, but something cracked open. A silence neither of them wanted to escape. The call came at 3:41 a.m. Runchu sat up in bed, alert the moment the vibration broke through the quiet. Sophia was asleep in the guest room across the hall. He stepped into his study and shut the door behind him. "Agent Zhao," the voice on the other end said. "It's time." His jaw tightened. "I need more time." "You've had 3 months. We gave you freedom because you were efficient. Now we suspect emotional compromise." Runchu stared at the painting on the wall across from his desk, a storm over the Yangtze River. "She doesn't trust easily. I've barely cracked the surface. We don't care about her trust. We want her proof. We believe she has documents that could indict the Zhao Political Fund, her ex-fiance's NGO, and several international shell companies. You told me she might be guilty, or she might be useful. Either way, you will secure the documents or deliver her location. You have 1 week." The line went dead. Runchu didn't move. His hands slowly curled into fists. Across the hall, unaware of the danger building around her, Sophia was writing under the glow of a desk lamp. Her fingers danced across her laptop as she compiled the last pieces of evidence: coded financial trails, signed contracts, secret ledgers. All of it traced back to her ex-fiancé, to the men who tried to silence her, and to a shadow fund linked to Chinese political elites. She printed copies, sealed them, wrote one name on the envelope: International Human Rights Tribunal, The Hague. She placed it into a larger brown parcel, walked quietly through the back stairwell, and mailed it at a 24-hour kiosk. No witnesses, no hesitation. By the time the parcel left Shenzhen, it was too late to stop. It started in the smallest moments. Runchu noticed it first, not in any grand romantic way, but in details, in her silence, which wasn't empty but observant. She'd sit by the window in the mornings, knees drawn to her chest, sipping jasmine tea and reading the newspaper like she was bracing herself for bad news. She always read the political section first. One morning, he found her correcting a quote under her breath, in flawless Mandarin. "They mistranslated that proverb," she said without looking up. "It's not, 'When the winds change, the strong build walls.' It's roofs. Strong ones adapt. They shelter others." He didn't know why, but that stayed with him. He started bringing home pastries from a bakery she once mentioned in passing. Never said they were for her, just left them on the counter. She never thanked him, but she always ate them. And once, she placed his favorite tea next to his laptop while he worked, without a word. There was a night they watched a film together, not on purpose, but because they both happened to be in the same room, too tired to leave. It was an old black and white noir with subtitles, and Sophia had her arms crossed the entire time. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "You're still watching it," Runchu replied, "because I want to see how many more stupid decisions this woman can make before someone arrests her." But when the final scene came, when the woman stood alone on the pier while the man was taken away in handcuffs, Sophia sat in total stillness, and when he glanced at her, her eyes were wet. She noticed him watching and said nothing, just got up, went to her room, and shut the door quietly. He didn't sleep that night. Another evening, Sophia caught him in the kitchen, half asleep in his robe, his hair messy, looking human. "You're not as cold as you pretend to be," she said softly. "And you're not as angry as you pretend to be," he replied, pouring tea. They didn't speak again that night, but the silence between them had shifted. She caught herself watching him too. The way he never raised his voice, even when irritated. the quiet way he touched books, as if they might bruise. Once, she saw him kneel beside a child who had gotten lost near the metro. He spoke to the boy gently, waited until the parents came. He never mentioned it afterward. Sophia didn't know when she started measuring other men against him, but she did. Then came the day she caught herself reaching for his mug by accident. Her fingers brushed the handle, still warm from where he'd held it moments ago. She paused, stared at it like it meant something. She told herself she was tired, confused, isolated, but that wasn't it. She was noticing him, and it terrified her. One night, she found him asleep on the couch, shirt slightly unbuttoned, a book open on his chest. She didn't wake him, but she stood there a little too long, watching the rise and fall of his breath. And when she turned to go, she whispered, barely audible, even to herself, "Please don't lie to me." Late one night in Runchu's study, the house was silent except for the whisper of rain against the glass. Sophia had gone to bed already. He knew because he heard her door shut softly, not with finality, but with exhaustion. The kind of quiet that made you wonder how many battles someone had fought in their sleep. Runchu sat at his desk, the shadows pooling behind him, and unlocked the drawer only he had the key to. Inside, a single beige folder. Her file, Sophia Joseph, alias Sophia Lynn, age 29, Nigerian national, former director, ELI Foundation. Status, fugitive, suspected of financial complicity, associated with political laundering, Minister Toba, and suspected embezzlement. He flipped through it slowly. Photo, passport quality. Expression, unreadable. He paused. That same face now moved through his house. That same mouth had asked, just 2 days ago, "Do you have sugar that isn't refined?" That same voice had murmured, "Thanks," when he passed her tea. The woman in this file is not the woman brushing lint off her second-hand coat in the guest room, he thought. Page 3. Financial audit. The embezzled funds never hit her accounts directly. She was named on documents, but all signed after her brother's disappearance. Runchu leaned forward. Signed under duress. Pressure suspected. The notes were vague, dismissive, no follow-up. He turned the page. Page 7, internal memos. Subject remains of flight risk. Highly intelligent, fluent in Mandarin, French, Yoruba, and English. Resilient, high tolerance for psychological stress. Possibly manipulative. He exhaled slowly. She wasn't manipulative. She was watching, always scanning, measuring, preparing exits. He thought back to her first night here, when she unpacked without speaking, moved like someone memorizing where the knives were, where the windows opened, where the escape routes were hidden behind minimalist furniture. This wasn't a woman on the run. This was a woman who had been hunted and survived anyway. He reached the last page. One final note, handwritten by a superior in red ink. Recommend Zhao R. Pursue relationship model for intel extraction. She trusts no one. Personal proximity required. He stared at the words. Relationship model. She didn't agree to this marriage because she trusted him. She agreed because she had run out of corners. He closed the folder, fingers lingering on the edge of the cover, then looked up at the closed door across the hallway. He wasn't falling in love. He already had, and he hadn't even realized it. But now he knew. He stood slowly, slid the file back into the drawer, and locked it again. Not because the file was dangerous, but because it was wrong. She wasn't the woman in those pages. She was someone no report had ever tried to understand. Late evening. The house is too quiet. Sophia stood in the hallway, barefoot, mug of chamomile tea in her hands. The lights were dimmed. The security system made a soft click every 30 seconds, like a heartbeat made of machinery. She didn't move for a while, just listened. Then it came again, the low murmur of Mandarin, spoken in a tone that was too polished, too measured, the kind of tone used when nothing could be misheard. She stepped closer to the study door. It wasn't open, but it wasn't locked either, just slightly ajar. "No, I'll report when I have something verified," Runu said inside. His voice was calm, controlled. A pause. Then, "Yes, sir." She's still cautious. "No, I haven't pushed." She doesn't trust easily. Sophia's heart lurched. She stepped back quickly, silently. The wood floor felt like ice under her feet. He thinks I don't trust easily? Why is he telling someone that? She went to the guest room and shut the door softly, then leaned against it, breathing hard. Her fingers trembled slightly. She gripped the mug tighter. Who makes weekly reports on a woman they just married? Who speaks in Mandarin that formal, unless they're in the military, or something like it? Her eyes scanned the room. There were cameras at the front gate, keypad entry at every hallway. The cleaning staff never came inside unless called. And Runu? He disappeared most days. Always had an alibi. Always had an explanation. She sat down on the bed and whispered to herself, "He's not a businessman. At least, not just a businessman." And the scariest part? He hadn't lied. He just never bothered to correct the assumption. The storm had cut the power 2 hours ago. Now the apartment was a slow-breathing thing, dim, flickering with candlelight, the rain painting steady rhythms against the windows. It wasn't loud, just persistent, like time whispering itself into the corners of the room. Sophia sat curled on the floor beside the low table, her knees pulled to her chest. One arm rested against her shin. A blanket was draped over her shoulders, but she hadn't touched the tea he'd made. The cup sat untouched, its steam long gone. Runu sat across from her, legs folded beneath him, his back straight, his hands loosely clasped. There was a book between them, one they tried to read aloud earlier to pass the time. Now it lay closed, forgotten. She spoke first, her voice barely louder than the rain. "When the lights go out like this, I remember being 10. Power outages in Lagos were common. We'd all gather on the porch with candles and tell stories. I didn't know then that silence could feel so kind." She looked away. "Now, when it gets this quiet, I feel like I'll suffocate." Runu didn't move. "Why?" She let out a breath that almost laughed. Almost. "Because now I know what comes after the quiet, what it hides, the things people say when they think no one will hear, the things people do." Her fingers tightened slightly over the edge of the blanket. "I used to believe in justice," she said softly. "I built my foundation on it. We helped people escape, got them education, safe houses, therapy." He listened. "And then I got engaged to a man who used that very organization to launder bribes. He stole their future, used my name to do it. And when I found out, he gave me a choice." She turned, eyes hollow. "Take the fall, or watch my brother disappear. And your family? Cut me off. They said I brought shame. My father, he was a diplomat, told me never to return. You know," she said, glancing at him, "I never told anyone the whole story, not even the lawyers back then. I thought, maybe if I told it all, they'd think I was weak." Runu's gaze didn't leave her. "Why tell me now?" She met his eyes, and for the first time, there wasn't anger behind hers, just exhaustion. "Because you've seen the worst parts of me." He didn't reply. The space between them seemed to bend with unspoken meaning. Candlelight flickered across the table, softening everything. "I used to believe in justice," she repeated, quieter now. "And then it betrayed me like a lover. She looked down at her hands. I started believing that if I just continued hoping, I could stop hurting. Her voice cracked. Runu rose slowly and crossed the space between them. Not with purpose, but with stillness. He lowered himself beside her, his thigh brushing hers. "You're still hoping," he said. "Even now. You mailed that evidence. You're still fighting." Sophia turned to him. "And what about you?" she asked. "Do you believe in justice?" A beat passed. Then he answered, "I believe in you." The words hit her like a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She blinked. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. Neither of them moved. The silence didn't crack this time. It deepened. He didn't reach for her. She didn't lean in. But their shoulders brushed again, and neither pulled back. The storm rumbled outside, low and guttural. Then, a slow exhale. Sophia's fingers reached, uncertainly, halfway across the blanket. Runu's hand found hers. Their fingers didn't entwine. They simply rested against each other, skin on skin, fragile contact. And that's when it shifted. The breath, the stillness, it wasn't planned, it wasn't orchestrated. It simply happened. 1 second she was staring at him, unsure, undone. The next, their mouths met, clumsy, breathless, full of questions. It wasn't perfect. It was real. A collision of grief and desire, and something neither of them could name, but had been building, quietly, in every glance, every silence, every moment they didn't let themselves feel. When they pulled apart, Sophia's forehead rested gently against his. She didn't speak, neither did he. There was nothing to say. Everything had just been said. The rain had slowed but hadn't stopped. It whispered down the eaves like breath held too long. Runu stood on the balcony, the phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and steady, honed like a knife. But inside, something was unraveling. Her name isn't Sophia Lynn. She's Sophia Joseph, daughter of Ambassador Kwaku Joseph, UN envoy, high profile. You were supposed to report any shifts in ID. He closed his eyes. The truth wasn't new. He had known. I didn't report it because she's not the threat. She's the target, Zhao. This isn't about feelings. It never was. You've been compromised. And this. The line went dead. He stepped back inside, soaked with guilt. Sophia was in the kitchen, barefoot, humming softly, pouring hot water over tea leaves. She wore one of his shirts, loose and casual, her curls piled on top of her head. The scent of ginger and citrus floated in the air. She looked safe. Not because the world had changed, but because, for once, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. And that made him ache. "Sophia," he said. She looked up. The hum stopped. Her hand stilled mid-pour. She saw it instantly. The stiffness in his shoulders, the storm in his eyes. What happened? He hesitated. Then, quietly, "I read your file 100 times, he said, voice low. "But none of it told me who you really are." A long pause. She didn't flinch, didn't lie. "Then maybe you were reading it wrong. Sophia Joseph, daughter of a diplomat, fugitive, director of a foundation that went under." He listed it like facts from memory. She stepped closer, eyes steady. She stepped closer. "You're not just a businessman," she said, her voice steady. "You never were." He said nothing. "I was waiting for the questions to turn into confessions," she continued, setting the mug down. "I guess this is that moment." She met his eyes. "I didn't lie to you, Runu. I was surviving." A breath. "You came to me with a fake life, a fake name, and a mission. You made me real. You asked me to trust you. And you sold that trust the minute you started writing reports. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I wasn't a case. I wasn't a file. Her voice broke. I was a person. Her voice cracked, but only for a second. I didn't initiate the deception, she continued. You wanted evidence. You infiltrate my life for intel. That's not true. He cut in. Then say what is true. He opened his mouth, closed it. And that silence, that was the final betrayal. I never wanted this to be real, she whispered, but I let it be. I let myself feel something. Her hands curled slightly at her sides, her voice tight. I thought I was falling for a man who saw me, not a mission, not a suspect. Me dot. He stepped toward her. Sophia. No. She backed away. Don't say my name like it means something to you now. Not if you still see me as data. A risk. A line in a file. I see you, he said, his voice rough. I see you now. Too late, she whispered. She turned, walked to the bedroom, and began packing. Not fast, not messy, just deliberate, precise, like someone doing surgery on their own heart. Runu stood in the doorway, fists clenched. Don't go, he said. She didn't turn around, just zipped her bag slowly. If you wanted me to stay, she said quietly, you should have seen me. She finally turned, looking at him. Really looking. Her eyes were wet, but dry by the time she blinked. Tell me something, she asked. If I chose loyalty over truth, would you still be here? He didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, but because the truth was messier than silence. She nodded slowly. That's what I thought. She brushed past him, the weight of her footsteps heavier than her bag, and he stood there, not stopping her, not calling her back, because deep down, he didn't even know what she had already done. When the elevator doors closed behind her, Runu didn't chase her. He didn't know how. He leaned against the wall and exhaled, like a man who had just been shot in the soul and realized the wound was self-inflicted. The knock at the door came just after dawn. Runu stirred on the sofa, blinking against the pale light filtering through the blinds. He hadn't slept, not since Sophia left. His apartment still smelled faintly of her jasmine body oil and the oolong she left half drunk in the kitchen. Then came the second knock, firmer. By the third, he was on his feet, cold dread coiling in his gut. He opened the door to find two men in charcoal suits standing expressionless beneath the corridor's fluorescent light. Runu Jiao, the taller one said, you're to come with us. Why? Runu's voice was flat, unreadable. Debrief, internal affairs. And that was all they offered. He was escorted to a private government facility in the outskirts of Shenzhen, where the walls hummed with quiet surveillance. Inside a sterile, windowless room, Runu sat across from Director Lin, his superior, his mentor, and the one man who had always called him Jiao, with a mixture of pride and threat. She turned herself in, Lin said, steepling his fingers, just walked into the embassy in Guangzhou with a sealed folder and said, I want to tell the truth. Runu didn't react. She's naming names, Lin continued, including ours. She's not wrong. Lin slammed the file on the table. You were compromised, emotionally entangled. You abandoned protocol, withheld intel, and failed to extract the asset. Runu's voice, when it came, was low but hard. She wasn't an asset. She was evidence. And you never wanted justice. You wanted her gone. Lin leaned forward. Do you have any idea what she's risking? What you're risking? Yes, Runu said. That's why I'm not afraid anymore. The director's mouth curled. We'll handle her from here. You're officially benched. Effective immediately. So you'll silence her? She's already being discredited. Her name, her identity, her past. By tomorrow, she'll be painted as a criminal, a liar, a foreign threat. Runu stood. Then I'm done taking orders. Walk out that door, Zhao, and you'll never work in intelligence again. Then I'll walk. And he did. A few days later, the world burned. Not with fire, but with truth. It started with a file, a single upload from a secure location, a hidden cafe in Guangzhou, where Runu sat at a corner table with a laptop open and his hands shaking ever so slightly. He uploaded everything Sophia had gathered: shell company bank transfers, emails, transcripts of illegal fund diversions, political interference, and names no one dared say aloud. He included his own field reports, redacted mission briefings, proof that the agency had known about the corruption all along. Let the world decide, he whispered. He hit send. The file was sent to 3 major international media outlets, 2 anti-corruption watchdogs, and, most importantly, the International Human Rights Tribunal. By dawn, the storm had broken. News anchors across continents scrambled for coverage. Massive corruption scandal involving political elites across China and West Africa. Anonymous whistleblower leaks intelligence documents implicating international aid laundering. But Runu didn't hide. At a press conference the next day, he stood alone. No lawyers, no government shield. Cameras flashed. My name is Zhao Runu, former intelligence officer. I stand here not as an agent, but as a citizen. The system I served has failed its people. And the woman you are vilifying, Sophia Joseph, did not run. She stood. And today, I am standing with her. The world exploded. China issued immediate denials. Arrest warrants flew out like sparks. 2 ministers resigned within a week. Sophia's case was escalated to tribunal review. Runu was stripped of his rank, his bank accounts frozen, his clearance revoked, and he smiled, because for the first time in years, he could breathe. He went home that night to his apartment, now stripped of surveillance, but filled with echoes. He poured himself a glass of water, sat at the window, let the silence settle. She was right, he murmured. Justice doesn't save you, but it sets you free. And somewhere across the city, Sophia, now in protective custody, watched the same press conference replay on a tiny television screen. Tears slipped down her cheek, not from pain, but because someone had finally chosen her. After the press conference, after the tribunal submission, after the documents spilled across the globe like shattered glass, Runu disappeared, not into hiding, into quiet. He turned down every interview, declined every book offer, ignored the encrypted messages from former agents and allies who suddenly remembered his number. He emptied his accounts, closed them, changed his number, and he left China, not because he was afraid, but because staying would mean choosing a battlefield again, and he was done with wars. He arrived in Kyoto, Japan, at the end of summer. The city greeted him not with fanfare, but with slowness. Stone paths worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, lanterns blinking to life in early dusk, wooden doors that creaked when opened like they were exhaling. He rented a modest apartment above a shuttered tea shop. It smelled of roasted barley and rain-soaked tatami. Below it, he opened a small used bookstore. No advertising, no website, just shelves of poetry, philosophy, children's stories in 3 languages, and space to breathe. He read Tang Dynasty poems to children on Saturdays. Sometimes he let them ring the bell. One afternoon, a little girl asked why he never smiled when he read happy stories. He said, "Because I remember the cost of joy." And she said, "Then I'll smile for you." He started smiling after that. He never spoke Sophia's name aloud, but she was in everything. The worn cushion he left on the reading bench, the jasmine tea he stocked though no one ever ordered it, the dog-eared copy of Dufu's collected verses that never moved from the shelf closest to the window. He didn't wait for her, but he also didn't stop hoping. The courtroom in The Hague was colder than she expected. Sophia sat straight back beneath the sweeping curve of marble columns, the tribunal seal casting its shadow over the witness box. Cameras weren't allowed, but the world was still watching. The prosecutor gestured toward the documents she had submitted. "Ms. Joseph, can you confirm that these are the original files you collected?" "Yes," she replied calmly. "Collected while I was working as director of the ELI Foundation, before it was hijacked and used for financial crimes by my former fiancé and his political allies." The judges didn't interrupt her once. They let her speak, let her unravel the truth she'd buried for years. She told them everything: how the threats came, how she'd been forced to sign documents under duress, how the same people who claimed to protect the vulnerable were silencing the loudest ones, and how a man she never meant to trust, who had entered her life as a trap, became the reason she fought again. The ruling came 2 months later. Her ex-fiancé, Minister Toba, was arrested in Nigeria, denied bail, and faced charges across 3 countries. 3 members of China's Zhao Foundation were indicted for conspiracy and obstruction. Runu sat alone in the back room, the envelope still open on the desk beside him. The television was off. The bookstore was silent. The scent of jasmine tea lingered, faint and ghost-like. He had read every page, every word of her testimony, every name she exposed, every crime she unraveled, and not once did she say his. His name was in the mission file. It was in the wedding registry. It was everywhere in the lies. But in the truth she told the world, she left him out. Not a footnote, not even a warning. She protected him, even when she didn't have to, even after everything. He swallowed hard. The walls felt too quiet, his breath too loud. His hands trembled as he reached for the folder she had once never known existed. The one marked subject: Joseph, Sophia, risk level, critical. He stared at the first page like it might blink back at him. Assigned agent, Zhao Runu. Primary directive, gain trust, extract information, neutralize emotional risk. He closed it slowly, carefully, like it might bite. His voice cracked in the silence. She protected me, even after I destroyed everything. He stood suddenly, the chair scraping back against the tatami floor. He gripped the edge of the desk like it might keep him from breaking. She gave the world the truth, but not mine. Because mine would have undone hers. His voice dropped into something hoarse and raw. Because the moment they knew I loved her, her testimony would have become a fairy tale. And then, quietly, the question came. What kind of man does that to a woman who never stopped fighting for him? He didn't cry. He just stood there, still, ashamed, shattered. Because now he finally understood. He hadn't been sent to destroy her, but by lying, by staying silent, by loving her only halfway until it was too late. He had done it anyway. And Sophia, she was finally cleared. Her passport was restored. Her father, once disgraced by association, publicly apologized in a statement that read like an overdue confession. But Sophia didn't go home. Not to Nigeria, not to Runu. Instead, she moved to Amsterdam for a time. Quiet apartment, river views. She wrote at night, when the city fell silent. She titled her memoir, False Wife, True Witness. The dedication read simply, for those they tried to silence, and for the one who chose not to. After a year of silence, no calls, no messages, he receives a package. Nothing fancy, just a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a ticket to Kyoto, dated March 27th, 4:11 p.m. arrival. A note, short, handwritten, in her voice. Runchu, I've spent a year becoming someone who doesn't need to run anymore. You waited for me, even when you didn't know if I'd come back. So this time, I'm telling you, meet me, March 27th, 4:11 p.m., Kyoto Station. If you're not there, I'll understand. But if you are, I'll finally come home. Sophia. Kyoto welcomes spring like a lover returning from war, soft-footed and scarred, bearing jasmine-scented apologies. The air was thick with the scent of wet stone, early plum blossoms, and something unspoken. A breeze threaded through the Shinkansen platform, lifting fallen petals into the air like secrets. Runchu stood near the far exit, where the crowds thinned and the shadows stretched longer. A canvas satchel hung over his shoulder. A small velvet box rested in his coat pocket. His hands didn't shake. It had been 1 year of silence, of waiting, not with certainty, but with the kind of hope that doesn't bloom loudly, only grows stubbornly in the quiet. He looked up at the station clock, 4:11 p.m., the hour she had walked out of his life, the hour she once promised, if she ever chose to return, would be the one she'd come back in. She hadn't sent a message, hadn't called, just a package weeks ago. One ticket, one date, one time, and her handwriting, small and precise. If you're not there, I'll understand. But if you are, I'll finally come home. The train pulled in with a low hum, cutting through the hush like a held breath exhaled. He didn't move. The platform stirred. Tourists, school children, an old couple with linked arms, a boy chasing his balloon, life passing through unknowing. And then he saw her. Sophia stepped down from the train in jeans and a loose cream blouse, her curly strands escaping into the wind. No makeup, no heels, no performance. She walked with the stillness of someone who had finally stopped running. Their eyes met. Instantly, effortlessly. She paused, 3 feet away. Not smiling, not crying, just looking. A long moment passed between them, stretched over months of silence, and the kind of longing neither of them had dared name out loud. You waited, she said. Her voice was quieter than he remembered, steadier. I would have waited 1,000 years, he answered, but one felt long enough. She took a single step closer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring, the same plain band he had once slipped onto her finger in a registry office, when love had been forbidden and names had been false. No diamonds, no performance, just presence. No contracts this time, he said. She nodded. Her eyes shimmered. Only love. He hesitated. Are you sure? Sophia drew in a breath, not because she was uncertain, but because saying it made it real. I want to choose you freely, not out of fear, not out of need, just because it's you. He reached for her hand, but she stopped him. Instead, she took the ring gently from his palm and slid it onto his finger. You chose me once, she said, her voice catching. Now I'm choosing you back. And that was it. No kiss, just two people, no longer pretending, no longer hiding, standing on a train platform in a foreign land where nothing was promised except the life they were about to build together. One quiet, free breath at a time. They didn't rush away from the station. There were no tears, no declarations in the middle of the crowd, just the hush that settles between two people who have already said everything, Without saying it all, they walked, past the vending machines and flower stalls, down the stone path that curved toward the Gion district, where the old houses leaned with history and the lanterns had just begun to flicker on in the late afternoon light. Sophia walked half a step ahead, her scarf trailing in the breeze. Her fingers brushed the fabric of his coat now and then, not holding, just touching. "I thought I'd be more nervous," she said softly. "You were never nervous," Runu replied. She gave him a side glance. "No, but I was scared." They passed a plum tree in bloom. A child ran past with a paper fan, laughing. "What changed?" he asked. "I stopped running from myself first," she said. "Then it got easier to turn around and look for you." He didn't respond immediately. He just reached out, slowly, deliberately, and took her hand. She let him. They paused at a narrow bridge, water rippling beneath them. "I read your book," he murmured. "All of it? Twice? Then you know everything." "I always did. I just didn't say it in time." They kept walking, past the noodle shop where an old couple sat sharing one bowl, past the bookstore where the window display had hand-cut poetry lines pasted across the glass, past the world that had kept going while they healed in silence. And when they reached the quiet alley behind his shop, the lanterns above them blinking to life, Runu turned to her. "I never asked," he said. "Why did you choose March 27th? Sophia looked up at him. Her eyes were clear, still, no walls. "Because it was the day everything fell apart," she said. "And I wanted it to be the day I put it back together." He nodded, gently lifting her hand to his lips. And in that still Kyoto evening, with the smell of jasmine blooming just beyond the alley walls, they didn't kiss. They just stood still, home, not in a place, but in each other. A few years later, the air drifted with the faint scent of sakura petals and damp soil from the garden courtyard behind the shop. Somewhere near the back, wind chimes made of recycled glass whispered as they clinked together. The little bell over the bookstore door jingled as a small child ran through, giggling. Runu smiled as he watched his son. The boy, 5 years old, full of questions and barefoot as usual, was clutching a crayon-drawn paper cap on his head and holding a bamboo stick like a sword. "I'm the defender of truth," he declared proudly, leaping from one tatami mat to another as if the floor were lava. "That's so," Runu said, rising slowly from behind the worn poetry counter. "Defender of truth, huh?" "Mama says truth is powerful," the boy replied, nodding seriously. "And Baba says we must protect it." "Baba says a lot of things," Runu murmured with a grin, stooping to catch him mid-jump and lifting him into the air. Laughter filled the small shop. Books lined the walls, second-hand, loved, smelling of ink and time. A corner held a collection of African folktales in Mandarin and Yoruba, and another stocked legal rights books in 10 languages. But on Saturdays, the back corner was cleared for a low reading circle where children gathered to hear stories from the man who used to live in shadows, and now read poems in daylight. Sophia entered from the hallway. Her skin glowed in the golden light pouring through the window, and her curls were piled high, a pencil stuck through them absent-mindedly. "Is the defender of truth giving his father a workout again?" she asked, smiling. "I'm strong now," the boy beamed, "but I have a question." She exchanged a glance with Runu. He set the boy down gently. "Go on, little lion," she said, kneeling beside him. The boy's expression turned thoughtful. "Mama, what does justice mean?" Sophia froze, just for a heartbeat. Runu turned, slowly walking toward the poetry shelf. He knew better than to answer for her. Sophia reached out and gently adjusted the paper cap on their son's head. "Justice," she began, voice soft, is when the truth is protected, when people are treated fairly, not because they're powerful or rich or important, but just because they're people. The boy furrowed his brow. Even if no one believes them? She nodded, especially then. So, like when the whole world says you're wrong, but you keep standing? Yes, she whispered, exactly like that. He blinked, then reached out and hugged her tightly, his small arms barely wrapping around her stomach. Then I want to be justice too. You already are, Runu said quietly from behind them. They looked up. He stood there, holding an old book in his hand, the one Sophia had first read in his library all those years ago, the poetry of Dufu. The page was still marked. There is no dust in the world to settle the heart, he read aloud, kneeling beside them, but your eyes made me forget the wind. Sophia smiled. Outside, the jasmine on the balcony had bloomed early, white petals trembling gently against the wind, stubborn and soft at the same time. Like truth, like justice, like the life they'd built from broken names, broken systems, and a love that refused to lie. The letter. She was never meant to find, written but never sent, to Sophia. I don't know how to begin this, perhaps because it isn't a letter I have the right to write. Maybe I'm writing it only because my hands need something to do when my heart is too loud and the world is too quiet without you. You're probably standing in front of a courtroom today, speaking truth to people who tried to crush you. And I'm here, in a bookstore I opened because I couldn't go back to a life built on silence and shadow. I keep wondering if I ever told you how proud I am. Not of what you survived, but of what you refused to become. When I met you, I was a man with a mission, not a soul. I saw you as a name in a file, a stepping stone in someone else's ladder. But you were never anyone's stepping stone. You were the cliff I fell from, and the ground that caught me. I never deserved your trust. I watched you struggle and said nothing. I learned your pain and stayed silent. But even then, something in me shifted. Every time you quoted poetry, every time you held your head up in rooms that wanted to break you, every time you choose dignity over safety, I think I fell in love with your silence first, because it said more than any of my lies ever could. I never told you the truth the way you deserved. So here it is. You made me human. If this letter never reaches you, maybe that's for the best. I don't want to be the reason you ever look back when you finally walked into the light. But if by some impossible thread you ever find this, and if, even then, you still feel anything at all when you think of me, know this. I loved you before I understood what love meant. And I will love you still, long after the world forgets who I was. Runu. She found it. Weeks after they moved into the new apartment, tucked behind the poetry shelf in a leather-bound book of Tang Dynasty verses. Sophia pulled it free one rainy evening, meaning only to reread her favorite poem. But the envelope was there, her name written on the outside in Runu's script, old ink, unsent. She read it in silence, then went to him without a word, the letter still in her hand. You never meant for me to find this, she said softly. He looked up from where he was cleaning a teacup, freezing. No, he said quietly. I didn't. She stepped closer, but I'm glad I did. And then, without ceremony, she wrapped her arms around him, pressing her forehead against his chest. No dramatic music, no grand speech, just two people, and the truth that finally had nothing left to hide. The end.